the DAW you choose, I think, has to be informed by the part of the industry you want to go into. If you're wanting to go into film music, then Mac, it's probably going to be Logic. If it's Windows, then it's probably going to be Cubase. If it's sound design, then it's most likely going to be Reaper or Pro Tools or this is a bit of a curveball one, but Ableton Live, I believe, is one that's known for its very technical and advanced capabilities with audio. But that's again more to the dance music perspective. If you're going into production music, that's kind of a slight crossover between film music and doing a normal production. So if you're someone that is planning to do both, then you obviously go with Logic and Cubase depending on what platform. But you can get away with pretty much any DAW that's got VST functionality and audio capabilities.
Hello, welcome to the next episode of Scenes+Sessions, Stories by Music. I'm your host, Xavier Lowe, and I am joined by three other co-hosts, Jonathan Worsley, Sam Griffiths, and Chiron Fairmont. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for listening and bearing through us for our first ever episode of the series. We're going to be splitting this into two sections. So in this one, we're going to be specifically talking about the actual physical tools. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about the mental tools of just like literally all the mindsets on all the skills that you need. So I think a good one is that the start is basically the DAW to choose. And this has been in sort of debate now because there are certain industry standards. But it has slightly changed in recent years. What would be the best sort of DAW to start with? So for me is that I've used a range of DAWs, but in this context, in my opinion, Logic Pro shows the most accessible and roundedness in this particular medium. I want to start with Sam on his opinion, because by assumption you use Logic Pro as well for your medium. Do you agree, or do you think there's like a possibility of another DAW coming in that is probably more accessible in that sense?
I agree. I want to first start out by saying to anyone listening who doesn't know what we're talking about when we say DAW, DAW is an acronym that stands for Digital Audio Workstation. So it's a software that you use to write music into and record music into. And there's several on the market. I also use Logic Pro X. My main advice would be to choose one and learn it fully rather than hop between lots of them, because they all fundamentally do very similar things, but they do specialize in certain areas. I choose Logic just because that's what I learned on back years ago. And then because I'm now super familiar with it, it's way more efficient for me to have that as my DAW and not have to think about how do I do this, how do I do that, because I'm so familiar with it. But Logic is my recommendation as well for someone starting. There is a caveat, however, that means that you have to be a Mac user, which does increase the price to entry because obviously Macs are not as affordable as Windows. However, I think there are some other options. There's Pro Tools, which is often known as the industry standard, or used to be probably 10, 15 years ago, but it is slowly morphing into becoming sort of more of whatever you want to use. But I would say my fundamental thing is pick one and stick with it.
Yeah, I agree. The best choice is always the DAW with whatever you choose. But obviously, when you never touch the DAW, it's kind of hard to say fundamentally what is the best. It depends on multiple factors, and obviously Logic Pro only works on the Mac OS system. which is the major downside. From what I've seen, like is either it was mainly Logic, then it was Cubase, basically like the Windows versions of Logic. But now the upcross of people using Dorico now, because it's a DAW and a notational software, which is quite interesting, because it's just like it's supposed to be revolutionizing what the practice of film music is doing, because you have to do stuff in DAW and then you have to do stuff in notation. Johnny, I'd like to know what your opinion about this, because you teach on the premises not just on film music, but mainly on the orchestral side. So you'll be looking at notation. What is your opinion on this, on aspects of the DAW, basically?
So I'd just like to add on top of what you and Sam have just said about Logic. So I'm not a Logic user, but I know a lot of people who have Macs. They start off on GarageBand, and GarageBand is like Logic Lite. And GarageBand, I've used that in the past. So if you understand how to use GarageBand, you can use Logic. So it's really accessible as long as you have a Mac in that regard. As you say, Xavier, I work in quite an unusual way when it comes to film music, even if I'm composing for a film or if I'm just writing any sort of music. I come from a notation first standpoint. So I use Sibelius to notate by Avid, and then my DAW of choice is Pro Tools. And recently, Avid have created some functionality between Sibelius and Pro Tools, being able to copy MIDI directly across. Pro Tools, it is getting updates all the time to try and maintain that industry standard feature. I think the most useful thing in Pro Tools for me is the elastic audio, because I also work with band stuff as well. So not just film music. So being able to stretch audio to be in time, Pro Tools does that so well. And also the Aura plugin integration. So being able to have Melodyne not as a plugin, but actually on the clip itself. And also RX, I can do that as well. I'm aware other DAWs do that, but Pro Tools is slowly catching up. In terms of accessibility for somebody starting off, I would recommend on Windows Reaper. As I'm sure many people would say, Reaper, it is a paid product, but they don't enforce it a little bit like WinRAR. When I was in the prog rock band, I always like to point to the t-shirt behind me, wrapping it there, Konom, we did the entire album on Reaper. So I recorded all my parts into Pro Tools, and it was so easy to get it over into Reaper. Reaper is like Pro Tools Lite, but it's far more customizable than Pro Tools, which is also a detriment because it means that you're overloaded with menu options too. So Sibelius for notation, Pro Tools for all my work, and I have used Reaper when I've had to.
Reaper is an interesting shout because it is sort of the industry standard for sound design for games and television, and on some occasions on film. I have a slight controversy with Reaper because it's like, it's fine if you're like quite an expert on the principles of music production and audio production. But to someone who's just literally just opened the door for the very first time, I would say is very overwhelming. It's sort of like, it's sort of the equivalent of powering a light bulb with a nuclear reactor. It is kind of really overwhelming and is unnecessary.
Can I just add on to that? Because I agree in a very particular aspect. And this is sort of how I sort of appraise old DAWs, is the ability to bus and send audio. And in Pro Tools, it's very much like a real mixing desk, which is why I like Pro Tools. In Reaper, you have to go within a menu and physically connect the cables together. And some of my students as well have used things like FL Studio, formerly Fruity Loops. And I've been teaching them how to mix. And I've asked them, can you just bus that to this other channel? And it's not a possibility natively within the DAW. So I think any DAW that allows you to bus audio, that has to be a given. And Reaper does make that a little bit more convoluted. But once you understand Reaper, it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, I agree, mate. It's extremely powerful. My caveat is that of its accessibility, especially when we're talking on the topic of literally getting started. I wouldn't recommend it if Reaper as a DAW to start with because of its overwhelmingness of information that is like could be very foreign to everyone. There are other DAWs that have these moments and they all have their certain quirks. Let's say that really, but I haven't seen a DAW that has like accessibility and all-roundness like Logic or Cubase. Chiron, I want to know your opinion since you come from a more audio production and music technology background. About your opinion on about what to start with a DAW?
I'd say really if you're coming from an audio perspective, really you can't get away from Pro Tools, especially if you're working in any professional studios. They're all still very much Pro Tools based. Yes, you're going to find potentially other DAWs in there, but you still can't get away from Pro Tools. What's good about a lot of programs and DAWs nowadays is they do offer a kind of different tiers of getting into them. So with Pro Tools, you've got Pro Tools First, which is their free tier. So if you really want to get to grips with how Pro Tools kind of functions and the routing within it, then definitely download that, have a little play about, and then so you kind of know what to expect if you're going into a studio. I mean, you won't kind of get that issue with having to deal with the DAW itself, because if you are hiring a studio, you're going to be having a studio person on hand anyway, who is going to be the person at the computer. But in terms of a perspective that I've used, the two programs that I'm most comfortable using are Cubase, which is great for film music and tracking, and tempo mapping on that is great. I've used it multiple times. It's got, I believe that's on different levels as well. So depending on what level you buy, it's got various plugins you can use with it. And also it's got similar time stretching algorithm to how Pro Tools is. And it's also cheaper. And I also believe, last time I looked a while ago, there's this little incentive that Cubase has that if you've already got another DAW, they've got a discount DAW switching thing that you can actually pay for a permanent license. I don't know if it's still active, but last time I looked a while ago, they did have that thing. You just have to prove that you own another copy of another product. So in the past, FL Studio has been fairly rigid with the way that it works. You know, it's very much oriented to hip hop and EDM producers, but it's become a lot more open in recent updates. So it's now currently on FL Studio 25, and so it used to be that you could only do 125 channels of routing, and mapping of different things, but it's now gone up to 500, and so you can easily create busing and all kinds of different setups. And in similar, because the way Reaper works is you've got usually a matrix of inputs and outputs, and that's where the learning curve for that really gets quite steep. But that's where it's most similar to Pro Tools in the sense that, as you mentioned, Johnny, about the ARIA plugins, I suppose the closest thing I could think of to that for Reaper is the script things. There's a lot of, because Reaper is very accessible, there's a community behind it that have written scripts that you can use it. And there's for example, there's a program called Vocaline, which is used quite a bit in voice production. And within Pro Tools, it's very much a click to tracks and just go a line, and it's really quick. Whereas trying to do that in FL Studio, you've got to record them into Vocaline and then press the button. Whereas I know there's a kind of free script that does a similar thing in Reaper. So it's definitely, don't put Reaper in the bin. It's definitely a thing to look at.
May I just add something to,
go on,
to your scripts there? So in Reaper, as an example, one of the scripts I've used as an orchestrator are for transposing instruments. So you can have it just set that if you're playing in a horn line, you can read it on the page, automatically transpose down a fifth. You don't have to worry about it. And that's great for beginners who might be trying to recreate Holst just to get the template started.
And and this obviously will be something to go on in the future, but I've seen it used from Kontakt perspective for sound designers, people that want to sample an instrument. It's been brilliant for that. I've watched, there's multiple tutorials. I mean, this applies to every DAW. There's so many different people using these programs. There's numerous tutorials that will cover most of the bases when it comes to Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, even Reaper. And so it's invaluable. So whenever you start with the DAW, I think that's, if you like everyone else said, choose one and really go into that and make sure that you know it really well before trying to jump around. And use YouTube, use all the tools you have to get you started. You know, there are, even the companies themselves provide getting started things.
Yeah, I agree. There are some interesting features within them. I don't know if like Pro Tools First exists anymore. I think it's Pro Tools Intro.
And one of the things we have to bear in mind with Pro Tools, like all of us have mentioned it, how it's so-called industry standard, plugins are all AAX format. And so they won't accept VSTs. And that's a huge barrier to entry. Every other DAW accepts VSTs.
Yeah. And also speaking of that, is like Pro Tools does have its advantages, and like, but the thing is I don't think it's the best for like, especially when you're starting out in this industry, when you're like going into the film music part. It's great with audio. I have no doubt about it. It is still great with audio, regardless of its little glitches and that stuff. But I would say the best would be Dorico currently at the moment, because it's a great DAW. It has the function of notation programming better than any DAW system that you can use it on. It is. I wouldn't say it's fluent as good as Sibelius, but it's decent enough that you can do copying work onto it. I know that, as you mentioned before, Johnny, that you can have like sort of like clock like syncing with Pro Tools and Sibelius, but it's not perfect. There are slight latencies issues with them when you're compatible. As with Dorico, it's all inbuilt engine. It's so you can work, and so it's like very zero latency. So you can work it in notation as well as working in audio. So I think that's probably the best thing, really. I'm just wondering if there's anyone disagrees with that kind of comment.
The DAW you choose, I think, has to be informed by the part of the industry you want to go into. So if you explicitly want to go into film music, the two that I'd recommend, so it depends on the OS again. So if you're wanting to go into film music, then Mac, it's probably going to be Logic. If it's Windows, then it's probably going to be Cubase, because people love the expressing wraps you can use within that program. And I don't know of any other programs that have that function. If it's sound design, then it's most likely going to be Reaper or Pro Tools or even this is a bit of a curveball one, but Ableton Live, I believe, is one that's known for its very technical and advanced capabilities with audio.
Mm-hmm.
But that's again more to the dance music perspective.
Yeah.
If you're going into production music, that's kind of a slight crossover between film music and doing a normal production. So if you're someone that is planning to do both, then you obviously go with Logic and Cubase depending on what platform, but you can get away with pretty much any DAW that's got VST functionality and audio capabilities. So FL Studio, I use that for production music, and it's been great. You know, stem, because obviously you need to be able to create stems and mix and master and edit things, and so you need a DAW that's got those kind of functionalities.
Yeah, I would still stay in the way that you look into the investment of Dorico, because it's pretty much everything that you described, as well as more on the notational side. I haven't seen a DAW that does all of that. It doesn't do like specifically one particular thing perfect, but I would say it's a little bit more gearing to the people who are like write more orchestral music rather than more hybrid, because it's not. In my experience, it doesn't show that great experience on like electronical music or electrical instruments in it. But we can go into semantics and we can debate about this all day, really. But like,
Exactly.
yeah. But and I would say in the fundamental things is just investigate into a DAW that you think is going to work specifically for your style. Like my workflow is going to be different to Sam's, and his is going to be different to Johnny's. So it has to work particularly how you would work in a workflow. So you need to find and research on that sense.
Related to what everybody's been saying, Dorico would probably be perfect for me. It's notation and it's a DAW. But the reason why I haven't is because I know Pro Tools like the back of my hand. and it would be like a few weeks of having to learn how to use Dorico,
Mm-hmm.
which I will do at some point, just not now. And if anyone from Pro Tools is watching this, make it possible to do tuplets other than triplets in your MIDI grid. If you do that, I'll never move away. That's the only thing I need. I want my 11 tuplets in a grid. Thank you.
The next topic I would like to go on is sample libraries, and we can talk about all these like different ones and all the amazing ones, or what is the affordable ones really. But I would like to go into the ones that are the very go-to ones, and this also depends on what DAW you choose as well, because the ones in Logic, the inbuilt ones, they're fairly decent enough to start off with. There are ones that are like that are using on the Kontakt player engine, which are decent enough as well, and they are free or quite affordable. But I like to hear people's opinion. Actually, I would like to hear about Chiron's opinion, because he is probably the only one that I know that collects more sample libraries than anyone that's
I'm
and
a
anyone who
hoarder.
collects. Yeah, you collect sample libraries more than people collect Pokemon cards, really.
Yeah, that's yeah. So the way I've always tried to do sample libraries, in the sense that I will try and not have overlapping sample libraries. So if I know that I've got a certain area of music that I haven't got a sample library that's decent in, I will buy. So if it's like a random one such as Celtic music or whatever, there's the Rena Cinemento, or whatever. I think I can't. Is it Rena Cinemento?
The new
I can't
one.
remember it's pronounced. It's by Fluffy Audio. It's been out for a few years by now, but it's got things like harpsichords and flutes and recorders in it, and like theorbos and really kind of Renaissance instruments, and quite interesting. Some of the instruments I wish could be better recorded, but it's a well-rounded library. The two companies I use for everything orchestral is 8Dio and East West, because I've had the oldest library I've got is Symphonic Orchestra, because the collection doesn't exist anymore, because they've long since switched to different things, where you could buy 6 of the libraries for a set price, and it would come from the US on a hard drive. You know, this is before SSDs were probably standard, so you just plug it into your computer. But so that's where I started out. But yeah, over the years I've bought different things. And Xavier mentioned Kontakt. There is one massive caveat with that, is that the majority of the free libraries require Kontakt full version, not Kontakt player. So the only way is to either buy Kontakt on itself, which is generally not financially feasible. It's usually best to have it as part of Complete, and you wait for their like Summer of Sound sales, where it's 50% off, or Black Friday. Yeah, any of their sale periods, usually it's between sort of like, it's usually about 50% off. It's not the cheapest sampler to buy, but because it's almost the Pro Tools of sampling, it's the industry standard one. A lot of companies have moved away from Kontakt in recent years and tried to make their own samplers, but it's to varying success.
So what would you think would be a go-to sample library when you're first starting out, whether it's like a free one or like something that's quite low cost in that sense?
So free, you've got the BBC Spitfire BBC Orchestra. That is your sound palette for anything orchestral. It's only your basic articulation. So if you want anything kind of extended, you're going to have to spend money. But it's got staccato, pizzicato, sustain. It's got no legato stuff in there, but it's great for starting out, and it's free. There's no caveats in any way. It's literally just download the player, because it's Spitfire's own player, and you just download it from there. And it's a really light library because of they're like one-shot samples. So that's why it's really quick to download. Then you've also got Project Sam Free Orchestra, which I believe that one works in the free player actually. So there is no cost to that one. You need to create a Native Instruments account and download the necessary Kontakt for it. And they've got, that one's interesting. So it's worth using, especially there are some legato libraries within that, I think. But it's a really nicely recorded bunch. Lower cost ones, So, you're talking anywhere between 20 upwards to £100 budget wise. I'd recommend 8DO stuff. They're frequently on sale and doing different bundles, and you can get a wide range of material. But again, caveat will be if you've got Kontakt, no issues. So I'd say the first thing to, outside of all of this, is investing Complete or Kontakt in some way. You need it. It's you can't get around it in most regards. Most of the major library companies, the sample library developers, use Kontakt as their main base. Even the boutique ones. So yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah, that's it's a good start, because some of those libraries are quite decently sounding, especially when they're free. I remember the very early sample libraries that I bought. They were fairly decent, but they're still quite expensive. £100, $100 back then, before rack of inflation. But yeah, but even then, the free ones they sound a little bit. They sound better than the ones that I bought originally back then. So it's just it's quite interesting.
It's a Complete Start. That's the free one that you can get from Native Instruments, which is a few of their libraries for free, which is great for people that want to do a bit of hybrid orchestral stuff, because it's got some electronic libraries in there, some sample libraries from, synthy things. It's also got a Complete Select. Actually, that's another point. Kontakt, if you buy Kontakt, it comes with the Kontakt Selection, which has various libraries, especially the more updated one, because for years it was quite old sound because it was VSL instruments from the 90s, orchestral. But now they've updated the instruments, so it comes with the band section with guitars and both electric and acoustic. It's got an orchestral section with solo instruments and sections. So it's basically your Complete Start. Ironically, it's not that version, but if you invest in buying Complete or Kontakt on its own, you will get the Kontakt Selection, whatever it's called.
Factory Library 2.
That's it. Thank you. Factory Library 2, and it's probably perfect for the starting film composer, starting library music composer, because the actual sounds sound good. So it's a good start point.
Yeah, definitely. Sam, I would like to know what your opinion on the sample libraries for what you use for trailer campaigns and anything in that genre. Is there any particular ones that your go-to, or would you recommend for people that are want to go down that route?
I would say the first thing, obviously, is I agree, you definitely need a full orchestral plugin and get to know that really well before then you specialize. So decide what genre you want to go down, which can be through trial and error. But I would also recommend getting some kind of synthesizer like Serum. I use Serum all the time, but also I think it's called Vital, which is a free, very accessible, and it's got so much functionality. In fact, if I hadn't already bought Serum at the time, I probably wouldn't have bothered buying it, because Vital is so good now. So I would recommend getting to know that. So you've got the orchestra and a synthesizer, and that gives you a good base start. And then once you realize you've got that base start, then you might want to specialize down into certain sections of the orchestra. So maybe you're struggling to get your brass to sound big enough or something like that. So you might want to there's Cine Brass, which is one I use all the time, or you might want a particular percussion. But my main advice would more be to use the main free stuff to start with, and then your own experience will guide you what you need next, because it won't be, I could tell you, go buy this library, go buy that one. And for me, that would be the right decision. But for you, it might be a completely wrong decision, because you might be focusing on a different area of something. And I think it's quite common to go, if I buy this library, my music will be good enough. And it's the next library. It's almost like once I get this, things will be better, rather than trying to learn the tools we've got already. Because a lot of the sounds that you get, especially from the free libraries, need a little bit of finesse, and you can't just play them. You need to be able to learn how to use expression with them and how to use modulation. And you'll find that a lot of them sound so much better as soon as you start doing that, rather than just play it in and go, this sounds terrible, it must be the library's terrible, and never use it again, and then go and spend another £100 or another £300 on something else only to find the same thing. It's much better to learn the tools that you've already got and dig in through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting input. I'd like to hear the opinion of what you think, Johnny, because you use sample libraries and as well as VSTs in an interesting light.
So I'm so glad you asked, Xavier. I feel so strongly about this that I've written a bunch of things down. I think it's really important, this part of it. In terms of sample libraries, for the kind of work that I do, which is trying to be as authentically acoustic as possible, only using synths when absolutely necessary, that I've written down like 4 absolute must-haves for these libraries. The first one is that it has to have all the articulations down. So Chiron, you were saying something like a tremolo, pizzicato, that in sort of like the way we were trained at uni in contemporary classical, where, you can write all these articulations and things for performers and get them to do all the aleatoric techniques. Well, I'm still in that mode, so I need my sample libraries to be able to do all of that. The next point, and this is an absolute must, are no joint ensemble patches. So if I've got a violin 1 patch, I don't want my violin 2s or my violas in there as well. I just need violin 1. If I've got a clarinet patch, I don't want flutes on top of that. I just need a solo clarinet or an ensemble clarinet patch so that I'm in full control. The next one, again, an absolute must, they have to be performable. As Sam, you were saying, with a MIDI keyboard and a vibrato control and dynamic control expression, it has to be able to be played in rather than having to tweak the MIDI settings. And there are some libraries I can name that I bought when I was a younger man that you can only use if you're tweaking MIDI settings and you can't just play them in. Particular jazz and big band library that I once bought. And the last one is that the libraries have to be able to be dry. So I have to be able to use my own reverb, put the samples in the room that I choose. Ideally with the panning that I choose, though the libraries that I actually use, which is Spitfire Studio Orchestra, they come pre-panned. So I'm kind of stuck to the panning that they use, but I use the studio rather than the symphonic because of how dry they are. And I can put them wherever I like. Based on something else you said, Sam, which is don't waste money on synths as well. There are free synths out there. Vital is phenomenal. I was teaching somebody last night and I was showing them pole stretch, where you can stretch out a track to infinite length of time. And the student had the revelation, why would he ever need to use a synth when he could sample his own music that's been stretched? And it's a cool new sound that nobody's ever made before. And suddenly he's doing sound design. Something else that I'd also add, don't neglect your mixing plugins. Yes. So I'd be lost without the Isotope suite, particularly Neutron and Ozone and sometimes RX, and also have a reverb that you know how to use, ideally a convolution reverb and maybe a whole reverb. But again, that's how I have to work because I use dry samples. So I need a reverb that works for me.
Yeah, I'd say that buying things like Neutron and Ozone, they're not cheap. They are great. They're not cheap, but they can be CPU heavy at the same point.
You can also try before you buy.
Yes, obviously trials. So, but I'd say for the starting composer, aim for those in the future, but stick with knowing the stock plugins first. So knowing your EQ, knowing your compression. Most DAWs, if not all DAWs, come with some form of reverb. Just use that initially, and then you'll have to invest in this type of work, in this type of career. So you need money coming from external sources. So initially it is going to be, you need to have a job to be able to invest in it. And so if the first plugin that you buy is, if it happens to be that you're thinking everything from a mixing perspective, then I'd say probably the best thing to initially buy is going to be a Reverb, actually, because there are some really great ones out there. There's Spaces 2 by East West, which is that's convolution, which is a load of sample spaces. So it's great for orchestral mixing. There's Seventh Heaven. I can't remember who produces that, but that's an expensive one, but used by a lot of film composers. There's also Verb. That's a really expensive one, but a lot of really like AAA film composers use it.
Going back to Complete, I use the ones that come with that. I use RC48. So just to show how I cut down on costs, I've got Complete, so I use the Reverb that comes with it.
Yeah, I agree. RC48 or RC24, there's the lower one. It's pretty decent Reverb. I pretty much use it. I'm very particular with Reverb, and I think it's the most like accessible on control of Reverb you want.
And don't forget that I know FL Studio comes with its own built-in native impulse response convolution reverb. You can get loads of free impulse responses. If you just type, I don't know, concert hall impulse response free, you're most likely going to find tons. And all it is just a small audio file you drop into the convolution reverb. And I believe Melda Production does a free convolution reverb as well. So you don't even need to spend money on good reverb if you just know where to look. So Melda Production, they've got a load of free good effects plugins. The one EQ that I can't live without is Fab Filter Pro Q3. I haven't upgraded to the Pro Q4, but Pro Q3, it is one of the best EQs I've ever come across, especially if you need to do things like dynamic EQ. It's got a slightly high price tag, but if you just wait for sales, and maybe, I don't know if they do crossgrades, but free trial. So remember your free trials. But
one thing I would also say is don't do the mistake which a load of people do of going and buying like 3 versions of the same thing. So don't buy Pro Q3 and Neutron and another paid EQ, and the same with reverbs. Just probably find, like, through free trials, download a couple of trials, see which one you like the best, and then stick with that. The difference I would say is reverb. I think it's nice to have a couple of different options with reverb. For EQs, essentially they are just a volume control per frequency. Obviously they do a little bit more than that, but fundamentally that's exactly what it does. And you don't need 15 volume controls, you only need 1.
Yeah, a little bit controversy into that, but it's like I use like various different EQs and compressors on when I'm mixing, but it really depends on what kind of sound it is that you're capturing. So it really depends on multiple different factors. For Isotope Neutron, I would say is the best one if you're not that confident in mixing, because a lot of the presets are pretty powerful already anyway.
Yeah. And also it's got the mixing assistant too, which analyzes the audio and gives you a kind of preset to use initially anyway.
Yeah. And it helps that you can obviously, and you can have much more control and changing like certain settings and that stuff. So it's very handy for that part if you want to go into if you're not that confident on mixing. Fab Filter is like you mentioned earlier, Chiron, is one of the best like plugins and EQs that you ever like. I have come across many EQs. They don't do cuts properly, but with the Fab Filter, they do the cutoff points are so precise. And that, so I would
distortion is stupidly good. Saturn, that's a really good one to use.
Saturn, I will testify this to like anyone really. Saturn is one of the best use in the mastering process, because it makes things much more better, because it's like you just like I'm even guilty of this. Just basically just put Saturn 2 on it, then put the preset Magic Mastering, and it just makes it instantly. And it just makes everything much more nicer, really. So
I do that.
I mean, obviously, the point that we're all making it is, so this is the all these plugins that we're talking about are most likely ones that people aim for once they're a couple of, I'd say, at least a couple of years into their career, it's just best to focus on the composition side of things initially, and because they're all different skills at the end of the day.
I agree, because a lot of this is an investment. Obviously, we've been doing this for I've been doing this for over 10 years. The others are pretty much roughly on the same years or follows. When you're starting off, you just want to learn the basics, and obviously the indoor EQs and compressors, they're surprisingly decent. They're not terrible, but there are limitations to it, and like they're not as powerful as the ones that we mentioned before. But like for literally starting off, and you're literally going to the beginning infancies of your career, is a good tools to really get your hands off it and basically learn how these things function. And then obviously you will get into the investments of into something like Fab Filter and the sample libraries that we mentioned before, really. But what is the most important thing that of your money should be invested is the computer that you should be using. That's a way into our next point of what you should be getting started is the computers. Now, there's probably going to be a little bit controversy on what we're going to be saying, because we all use different machines. So, the specs should be fair, but the specs should be fairly the same. I use a Mac system. I use my Mac Studio, and I'm using it right now for all of my work, regardless. And it's pretty high spec, on the sense of like pretty high processor, like i7 processor, and I'm using 64 gig RAM. What I would say as well, it depends on your storage. You can go for high storage and like help with that, but I would say don't go so high in the way that because you can pretty much back everything up on cloud storage and external hard drive, because whatever you're going to be working on, especially if you're going to be working on with like production music, you're going to be working on ridiculous amount of volume of music. So you're going to be like storing so much stuff. So yeah, I would say that is the main caveats of it for the computer side of things. But when you're starting off, it could be simpler. It could be something like a laptop. I started when I started was a laptop. It was the very minimum bones back then. It was like 8 gig of RAM, and then like very low processor. But like, I would say if you want to invest and you really want to go into this, I would say like something high spec on processor and RAM. I want to hear everyone else's like a view. Johnny, you're very passionate on like computer specs on here. So what's your opinion on this thing?
Well, I'm only passionate because I'm in the middle of purchasing a new one. So my current machine, to be completely transparent, is from 2015. So it's 11 years old, and it cost me $1,500 back then, 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm still able to do all the work that I still do today on it. But the machine that I'm looking at buying, it's a custom one. It's 2000. It's going to be 64 gig of RAM, modern processor, larger internal storage. I have my sample libraries on an external hard drive, which isn't the best for like recall speed. And another thing that I really need for my computer, which I didn't consider for my current machine, are quiet fans for audio recording. I recorded a song last July where I was singing and playing the guitar, had the microphones right here, same microphone that I'm using now. And when it ran through the mastering, that's the only time when I first heard my computer fan in the background. And then I had to go back and RX all of that out. So if you're ever doing actual audio work in the same room as your machine, think about the actual volume of the fan and clean your fans out as well. It's an easy job. Vacuum cleaner, get it to blow, or a cold hairdryer, something like that. But and I use Windows, of course, for that.
Yeah, as I use an OS system, Mac OS system. That's pretty much how I first learned in this business, really, is just basically using on a Mac system. Sam, I would like to know what your opinion, because from what I recall, you use quite a minimal setup for how your work process is, basically.
Yeah, so I use a MacBook Pro 2021 M1 Apple thing, and it's It's 32 gig of RAM. I also keep nothing on it. It's all on external SSDs because I like Johnny, I like having it off the system. But then there's the recall speed of hard drives is not as good as SSDs. So I find SSDs allows me to run my plugins easier and load libraries without having to wait long times for hard drives. The reason why I've gone for the laptop is because I like to be able to work when I travel, which obviously if you've got a desktop system, you leave it at home and you cannot take it away with you, and probably will end up having to invest in some kind of laptop clone of your system in order to do any work if you're working away. The disadvantage of a laptop is it's less affordable to get the same amount of power. So for the same price, you can get more power on the desktop than you can on a laptop. But if you can afford it, I would recommend getting the laptop as spec'd out as you can, and that way you get the best of both worlds. Because the way I'm working right now and the way I work every day is I have my laptop and then it's plugged into what is essentially a makeshift desktop system. I've got an external speaker system, external extra screen, and it's the same as working on a desktop when I'm here, but it also means that I can take it on the train, I can take it on a plane, I can go wherever I want with it, and I still have a system.
Yeah, it's very accessible and you can pretty much work anywhere. So it's pretty decent for that. Yeah. It's
obviously
quite an investment, I would say.
It's not for everyone. Yeah, my laptop cost me, I don't even remember. I think it was £2,500, nearly £3,000. So you can get probably the same amount for less than that these days. But something worth investing in, because ultimately, if you are serious about making music as a career, like, which I would have thought as a listener of this podcast you probably are, then not running out of RAM. I would say RAM is one of the main things that you need to, because if you've got big orchestral plugins, they use a lot of RAM and you need to max out the RAM as much as you can afford, really.
I'll just add something there for anybody who's maybe seeking advice for their first machine, as I did those 11 years ago. I asked a friend who was doing computer science about building this PC, and I explained, I need lots of RAM because I'm doing music production. And this friend looked at the specs of Pro Tools and said, Pro Tools doesn't need much RAM. You don't need much RAM in your machine. And it was only down the line that I realized that it's all the plugins that we're going to be running simultaneously that eats up your RAM and your CPU. So if you go into a computer shop and you don't really know what you're doing, you might have to explain to someone it's not just one software that you're running. It's going to be 150 simultaneous intensive.
It's the cumulative effect of building everything.
Yeah, definitely.
If you are on a system that is like a little bit older, and because I would say the best laptop to use or best computer to use is the one you've got when you're starting out, and then later down the line upgrade as soon as you can, really. But you can definitely I got started on an old Windows machine that was my one that I got from school, not that I got for school, and it was like 4 gig of RAM. It was very, very basic, bare bones budget laptop, and it wasn't very good, and I was struggling. I was running out of RAM all the time, but it got me started, and that is ultimately it. Don't wait to get the good computer to start. Just start on whatever you have and then upgrade as soon as you can afford to.
Yeah, I agree, because the first computer that I started on was a MacBook. I think it was either a MacBook Pro or a normal MacBook that I got handed down from my sister, because she did video editing. So I got handed down by that. I want to ask the same question to you, Chiron, because you have a sort of similar setup as Sam, but you use on a Windows system. So what's your opinion on it?
Well, I did recently move to a desktop from being on a laptop for approximately 6 to 8 years, because I lived in Wales for a while, and so it called for only being able to have a laptop, but I made sure that was custom to the spec that I could afford. So the first laptop that I had was 32 gig. I think it was a 4-core processor, Intel, and then the next laptop, the technology had moved on about 3 or 4 years later. So you talk about 2019 now. That one was SSD, 3 terabytes, so smaller, but still enough for kind of what I was doing, because I wasn't really focusing on film music at all, and so I was just doing electronic dance music, and that's all MIDI and synthesizers. And I believe and then I got a third laptop in 2021, so it wasn't 3 years, it was more like 2 years later after that one. And so that one was 6 terabytes internal SSD split across 1 terabyte for the OS, and the other side was for sample storage. My desktop is the most expensive. That one I spent around 2,400 on, and this was before any of the kind of prices went up for RAM and hard drives and SSDs and things like that. So that one is the biggest storage I've got. So the OS is on a 2 terabyte hard drive. The sample recall side is on the larger of the 2 drives, but slightly slower read and write speed, which is an 8 terabyte. And then I've also got a dedicated GPU as well, because that helps with some processing times, especially if you're doing a little bit of video stuff on the side. And it also helps because obviously if you think about it, these programs need a good graphics card to see the screen. If you've got a massive project when it comes to film, I'd say having a good graphics card will help load things and everything's a bit more zippy.
Especially if you're like me and you use your machine as a gaming machine as well.
Exactly, yeah. So mine effectively, the way that I bought all of these computers were gaming laptops, just kind of specced out for what I wanted music wise. But you would just go on the website, the custom build website, and you just click customized gaming laptop, because that's effectively what they are. The one point I wanted to make as well, when people mentioned RAM, there's not too much of a focus on RAM nowadays. If you've got the most recent versions of Kontakt and then Opus with the East-West stuff, so not using their Play, but Opus libraries, they've got the purge RAM function, so it only loads the samples when you're actually playing them. And then also there's a function, I don't know if Kontakt does this, but I think it does. But I know with Opus, it's got a function where it doesn't load it in. If it knows you've got the fastest type of storage, it won't load it into RAM. If you find that the cost of RAM is too much and you can get a good quality SSD, then maybe look for an SSD with the speed of it's good and you've got a good space capacity on it. And so you won't need to boost up because my RAM's 64 gig. I was intending to go to 128, but I ended up not doing that because the RAM price is being so diabolically bad at the moment.
There are things you can do as part of your workflow if you've got lower RAM, like in Pro Tools, you can freeze your tracks. But the problem with that is it completely changes your workflow. Instead of just being able to go back and edit what you've done, you have to have it in mind, right? That's now done, which is probably a better way of working.
That is a method that some film coders use. So they've got so-called sketching sample libraries, which are essentially usually just ensemble patches. It's a stripped back version of their
ensemble patches,
of their idea. Yeah, I know it's the Antichrist.
But I'm very sorry, Johnny. That's how I write. I write on ensemble patches, and then and
then you can orchestrate it later. But that's the best way of getting your idea down, especially if you're scoring and you're up against the mark. Is that you need to. If you're playing, especially if you're playing stuff in, you don't want your library stuttering constantly if it's got so much loaded in the project.
I just want to add something as well that I don't know if other people are aware of, and anybody watching this, is that SSDs do have one drawback, which is that they deteriorate if you continually write to them, whereas a hard drive doesn't. So a hard drive, even though it's slower, it's going to last you like guaranteed forever as long as you don't knock it about. But an SSD, if you are continually putting files and retrieving files from it, it will deteriorate in size over time.
And actually, that's a good point that I believe Xavier made, is about cloud storage and backup. Always have a backup solution, at least 2. The one that I like is Google Drive, because it's it's all in everything I got. And it's also got a desktop client that will automatically back up any changes you make to a folder. So anytime that I've exported any stems or made any changes to a project file or created a new version of the product, it will automatically upload on my internet connection. So the caveat there is obviously the speed of your internet. So if you've got most people nowadays have got broadband or fiber optic where their speeds are more than 30 megabits a second. So the upload speed is generally decent enough to upload things. And so I've got almost an instant backup with certain folders I choose, and it's the primary, folders where it's work stuff, So if it's any production music, if it's anything that is, it's even like your tax stuff or anything that's essential for your life to run, make sure you've got a cloud backup of it that's instant.
Photographs as well. I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, you lose photos. Yeah.
And then also have a separate local storage backup as well. So I use Macri and Reflect as my local backup storage. And so you need to make sure you've got a hard drive. All this sort of knowledge is like, oh, great. But given the current prices of storage, some people might not be able to do this. So it's the cloud storage solution is probably the best for a starting composer. But if you've got a computer, say, with 4 terabytes of space on it, if you're having a local storage solution, you want probably an external hard drive, not SSD, a hard drive that is probably about double the storage capacity, because the way the Macri and Reflect works is you've got the main storage and then you can do a differential backup as well after that. So it's not saving the same amount of data constantly, whereas so the differential backup is only whatever's changed in the folders since you've done that main one. Yeah. Number one option, make sure you invest in a cloud storage solution. And they're not expensive, especially if you're starting out and you're not exporting gigabytes upon gigabytes of data. Then the starting storage space you get for Google is 15 gigabytes. So, I pay for 2 terabytes a month, and that's only about £8 a month. So
Or it's
more than happy for me.
It's like £90 a year or something like that is what I pay for my Google Drive.
Yeah. So it's pennies in the long run, especially if you've got clients. If you're able to get clients within, a short period of starting, you don't want to have your system crash on you, and maybe you luckily exported your stems already. And so if you're able to retrieve them through another source and you can send them off to your client, happy people around.
Yeah. And if you've got clients, it's tax deductible.
Depends on the client, really.
But yeah. But yeah, it's, business expenses and all that, obviously. Yeah. But it's incredibly handy as well, because I don't just use Google Drive to back up my computer. I use it to back up and so actually that's a good point that Sam made. So I've got a dedicated computer where I do all my composition on that's at home, but I've also got a computer I take on the go, and that one is basic spec. And so it's 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I do really basic stuff on it, but it's great for being able to take things out and about. And so if I need to do any sketching stuff, I just keep really basic libraries on there. You even just use your general MIDI libraries just to get your idea down.
Those RuneScape fonts, use them.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you get back to your studio, you're able to properly make it sound amazing with the libraries you've got on your main system. That is one of the issues that, if you've got a laptop, then you are kind of a little bit more constrained, whereas sometimes with a desktop, you can be a bit more free with how you run things.
Speaking on the storage and backup, really, one thing I would also say is on the local storage for your particular files and that stuff. I would also say always back up your system as well. And for people who are using Mac OS system, use Time Machine constantly.
Yeah, it's called System Restore on Windows.
Yeah, I knew it was something like that, but I that will be your saving grace. Just always have a dedicated hard drive that backs up that system, because I had to learn that the hard way, really, because it's just like there was one time like my computer just completely crashed and I had to completely reset it, and I had to reinstall everything, and it took so long, and I had and it delayed my workflow completely by 3 days roughly.
Wherever you can. I know that it's an antichrist unto itself, but where you've got plugins that use things like iLock or some sort of external license authenticator, don't use a hardware license ID where you can, because if your computer crashes, you're at the mercy of the company at giving you unless you've got with with iLock, you've got the zero downtime option, which I think is £30 a year.
That's right.
And so that it can give you almost automatic licenses in the meantime. Although zero downtime is if your iLock itself crashes, not so much the hardware licenses. I don't know how it applies to that, but wherever you can, buy an iLock, keep everything on that. For example, Waves have got a similar thing where you can turn a USB stick into a kind of external license carrier.
Or use their cloud licensing. I think iLock has cloud licensing.
Well, yeah, and luckily with Waves, you can recover the licenses at least once a year, and then it resets.
I'd like to move on to the last point for this episode, really, on the audio interfaces and like other particular gear like speakers and etc. But the thing is that I would say if you really want to go into working in the box or working just in the DAW, I would just only really invest into one audio interface. My go-to would be a Scarlett Focusrite 2i2. I can't remember. I don't know what generation it is. But the very first one I bought was the very first generation. But it is a good interface, and it gets audio pretty clean. And if you have a mic, you can just plug up to two microphones into it. Yeah, so that's good. Chiron, what's your opinion, since you're the most music technological expert on all of us?
I wouldn't go that far, but I'd recommend, if you're starting out, don't get an interface just yet. Just invest in a decent pair of headphones, because most computers' internal sound cards are probably going to be decent enough to do what you need. If you're not recording anything in, especially, if you're purely just going to be a composer in the sense of working with sample libraries, then you're not going to need a sound card. It's later down the line that you need to invest in something like that. So really your best kind of headphones to maybe invest in would be companies like what I'm wearing is Free Sonus, which these ones are only about £30-40, and then I've got a more expensive pair by Beyerdynamic. They were about £100, and it goes all the way up. But just get the type of headphone that is kind of best bang for buck. Don't go for too many of the sort of premium brands. Don't use earbuds. They've always got some sort of extended bass response, so it's not going to be the best for mixing. So always go for overheads like this. Don't go for don't use your Apple earbuds or anything like that. Wired rather than wireless. That means you can use them for longer, and you're not constantly waiting for them to charge up. Sound card wise, I use the same company that Xavier uses, and so it's a Focusrite Scarlett, but it's the rack mount version, so it's the 18i20 third version, I think. There's a fourth version now, I believe, but I use the third version, and I bought that off Reverb, and it was cheaper because it was refurbished from the official website. So just if you want to get yourself a good quality sound card, maybe look at the refurbished versions that some companies do.
Yeah, you mentioned about like headphones. I definitely agree that you should invest in some decent headphones, because you're going to be working in audio, obviously. There's no point of just using earbuds or just terrible earphones. Obviously, investing in some good headphones. There are some affordable ones out there. Behringer makes some fairly budget and affordable options that are decent headphones, unless you want to like spend some good money on some like very decent ones. I'm very like particular on headphones because I spend a lot of money on like for good quality and like good responses. The ones I'm wearing right now is a AKG K712. I would not recommend it to buy them because they're about £200. So unless you really want some good quality and you're going to be wearing them like pretty much like hours and working, then sure, go ahead. But yeah, I would definitely say that headphones is a good investment and especially on this point.
And also another point as well is once you buy headphones, get to know them. When it comes to mixing, reference as much as possible, because the way that a track will sound can vary from system to system. You know, there's always that whole do the car speaker test, isn't it? But it's the fact that things sound different across different systems because of the way of frequency response is. So really get to know your headphones and know how they respond to just similar music. So if it's orchestral music, listen to composers you admire as well as just standard classics and things. So if you like the style of John Powell, listen to How to Train Your Dragon soundtrack and see how the instruments sound on that, and then maybe try and emulate it within your own mixing style. There's a lot more there's a lot more I could go into about. It's not a foolproof method, but it's the best way to kind of get to know your headphones, especially because I know how these headphones sounds when I'm creating music, and then when I switch to my Beyerdynamic, there's a completely separate sound to those because these ones are open back headphones, which are usually the best for mixing, and then I've got Beyerdynamic ones which are closed back, and so the frequency response on that is different as well. These ones have got sort of a slightly more bassier sound to them, whereas the range on the Beyerdynamic ones feels like almost the bass is reduced and there's more of an emphasis on the higher end. So it's just knowing what the difference is between those.
Sam, what kind of interface and headphones that you use, particularly in your line of work?
It's pretty much the same. Like I'm working on with a Focusrite as well. Like I think the main thing with that is having some way to get audio into your computer. So whether it's the Focusrite or an Apollo Twin or whatever you choose to use, the reason is so that you can get a microphone and plug that into your computer. The other thing which we haven't mentioned yet is get a decent MIDI keyboard. As a composer, you're going to need a way to get your notes into the score without having to like program it in. If you want to play it in, having a good MIDI keyboard with weighted keys so it feels like a piano and you can add expression to your playing through your keyboard is really important. And in terms of headphones, I would say the most important thing is just being able to know them inside out. And what I mean by that is, as Chiron was saying, reference things, particularly within the genre, whatever you're working on. So if you're working on film music, reference film music of a similar genre by people that you like. If you're working on trailer music, reference trailer music. And just listen to your favorite things to it as well. Like get to know exactly how that pair of headphones responds. And the same with speakers. And speakers are affected by the room that you're in. So room treatment can come in, and there's some corrective software you can buy to help with that. But fundamentally, having a good treated room is probably more bang for the buck than the corrective stuff.
Okay, that's very interesting from your perspective. You mentioned about like MIDI keyboards, and I want to know what Johnny's perspective on this, because as a pianist, I would suggest that you have a particular taste or like have a specific requirements for something like this.
For a MIDI keyboard, the first thing I'd say is be like Sam and have piano lessons as well. That's going to be one of the most important things that you can do is your facility on the instrument and it not being a crux. In terms of MIDI keyboards that I use, I tend to use the things that feel most like a piano. So I'm currently on my teaching piano, which is one of the cheaper Yamaha ones. It's the P145. I think that's what you also have, Xavier. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And I mean, what this is missing is a mod wheel that's internal that comes with it. Everything else that I've done was on my Nord Stage 2, which has a mod wheel and a pitch bend. That's at band practice, and actually it exploded at band practice, which is another point entirely. I do have another MIDI keyboard that I think it's Alesis. I bought it back at university and I've not used it at all. I got it because it had multiple mod wheels and drum pads, and I've just found being able to have 88 keys, which means in terms of film music, access to all the key switches if you need them, or the entire range of a percussion setup. But mainly because I'm performing in keyboard parts, that I need the entirety of the piano to do that. And I need the response from that and the sustain pedal, and just to feel like I'm performing.
I've got a Novation Launch Key 49 Mark 1. It's really old, but it does the job. And it's got so many, it's got obviously the pitch and modulation wheel, which, like Johnny said, make sure you need one like that. But it's also got assignable sliders and such. So
it is one of those important things that you need in when you're like playing those in. I used to do it the start of my career, but like then over time I just didn't really do that because it's like obviously I'm not a pianist, so like it doesn't really compute with me of doing that at the same time. So like over the time I just kind of just plays things in and then just did that afterward. That's how I workflow. But yeah, now I just use like a normal piano and just basically just play like a normal electric piano, like Johnny said, and just play that in and then just do the modulations after, because that's how I came to accustomed to work. But like maybe in a sense, like in workflow for when you're starting out, I think it would be better because it's much more efficient that way, and you actually learn how and understand how a string is played or a brass or wind instrument is played. I would say that's the best way of learning on how to actually program them in. But it really depends on multiple factors of how your workflow is, really.
I'd really reinforce the fact that if you're using a MIDI keyboard, you want to be able to play the piano or the keyboard. Why spend all your time learning a MIDI keyboard, and then when you're faced with a real piano, your fingers won't go down on the keys, which is exactly what happened to me when I was about 13. I couldn't physically press down on a real piano because of the touch response. So if you're investing this time, why not do two birds with one stone? Learn about legato performance and think like an actual performer, and it'll come across in your playback.
Speaking from an orchestral member, I play a brass instrument, and I spent majority of my playing career in an orchestra, so I pretty much know how an instrument works. But trying to translate that on a piano, it doesn't work for me. It's just like I have to do it manually. Because it's just like, even when I try to do it almost perfectly on a keyboard, it doesn't sound right. So it keeps messing with my mind. So I have to do it in post anyway. So it really depends on how it is. So
if you're coming to film music already being an established musician and you play an instrument, then that's great. The MIDI keyboard is a tool. But if you're just starting off and you're using the MIDI keyboard, you have no musical, like actual performance ability, then I think that's such a core aspect to being a musician. You don't want to, I don't know, be in old age and you're a composer, but you can't express yourself on an instrument. It's one of the great joys of humanity. So you might as well do it at the same time. So if you've got a cheap MIDI keyboard, the reason why I keep looking behind me, to anyone wondering, is I've got a Korg Nano Control 2. And it's on top of my hammered dulcimer at the moment. I've not got a space for it. And so I use that in conjunction with this Yamaha keyboard, which has no mod control. It means that I can play with one hand and I can control everything else with my left hand, which is exactly the same as how I would do it live. If I'm playing prog, I'd be doing my pitch bends with one hand and the playing with another. So it becomes part of all part of the same performance.
Yeah, definitely, I would say. Well, I think that's pretty much like gone through all the topics of this episode. So we're just going to do a quick summary of it. So basically DAW, there's lots of different options. Logic and Cubase is pretty much the industry at the moment, but I would say probably maybe investigate into Dorico because it seems like it's one of the most all-round engines for DAWs. Sample libraries, there's like plenty of like amazing free ones out there, like BBC Discovery and Berlin Free Orchestra, and there's probably some others that you like probably want to investigate. Computers, it is obviously you need to have a good specs of RAM and processing power, as well as you probably invest into some SSD and external hard drives. And interface, you can never go wrong with a simple Focus, Scarlett Focusrite 2i2, and some decent headphones. We've given some examples, but it is best to go for ones that it works for you and how you workflow, really. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time to join me on this podcast. And we'll see you in the next episode for part 2. But from me, it is bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye. Bye all.